A poor girl got into the millionaire CEO's car thinking it was an Uber and won his heart. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. One small mistake in the middle of a rainstorm, and she climbed into the car of the man who would turn her entire life upside down. They say fate comes unexpectedly. For Grace Stone, fate arrived in the shape of a sleek black Mercedes, and a mistake so charming it would change everything. That morning, Grace was wrestling with time, weather, and an umbrella that had clearly given up on being useful. Her chestnut hair clung to her cheeks, her shoes were soaked, and her phone had just flashed, "Your Uber is arriving," before dying completely. She groaned out loud. Perfect, dead battery, and I'm officially doomed. Just then, as if the universe had sent a lifeline, a luxury car rolled to a stop right in front of her. The window was down just enough for her to glimpse the driver's hand. Steady, professional. Grace didn't hesitate. "Yes, that's me," she shouted, yanked open the door, and threw herself into the back seat, rainwater soaking into the leather. She slammed the door shut, breathless and dripping, then collapsed into the seat like she had just survived a monsoon. "Go, go, go! I'm late! If I get fired on my first day, I'm blaming you." She couldn't see the driver's face, only the broad shoulders in a dark suit and a gleaming watch gripping the wheel. He said nothing, which only made Grace talk more. "I'm heading to a meeting with the new CEO. They say he never smiles. Like ever. Ice cold. If I show up 3 minutes late, I'm toast. No second chances." And just like that, the floodgates opened. "Oh, don't take the turn by the bakery, please. Last time my Uber did, it added 10 minutes. By the way, do you know that little French cafe at the corner? They charge $9 for a croissant. 9! I had one yesterday and I still feel guilty. It was dry, overpriced, and didn't even fill me up." Still no response from the man behind the wheel. Just a glance in the rearview mirror. His eyes steel gray, sharp and unreadable. The light turned green. The car moved forward slowly, calmly. Grace let out a relieved sigh and leaned back in the seat, completely unaware that she had just stepped into the first chapter of a story she never saw coming. "Thanks, by the way," she added with a grin. Quiet, polite, punctual, definitely a 5-star driver. The car glided through the rain, and somewhere between the sound of droplets on the windshield and the chaos in the back seat, the man behind the wheel, silent and composed, let the faintest smile tug at the corner of his lips. She had no idea. She just bossed around the CEO of the company she was about to work for. The rain still clung to the city as Grace Stone stepped into the company lobby. Her hair was damp, the hem of her pants soaked, and every step in her shoes made a soft, humiliating squish. The elevator was packed. A coworker gave her a quick glance, more puzzled than judgmental. Grace looked away, head slightly lowered, hands clenched around the strap of her bag. When she reached the executive floor, it felt like she was dragging her dignity behind her. Still catching her breath, she slipped into the meeting room and found a seat in the farthest corner, hoping no one would notice her soggy state. Then the coordinator's voice rang out, crisp and professional. "Please welcome our new CEO, Mr. Thomas Miller." The door opened. Time slowed. Shiny leather shoes stepped into view, a flawless gray suit. And then, his face. Grace looked up, and her heart skipped, stopped, and did a double take. It was him, the man who had driven her to work that morning. Same eyes, same watch, same quiet intensity behind the wheel. Thomas Miller, the CEO everyone had been buzzing about, was the same man she had just ranted at in the back seat of what she thought was her Uber. She had told him about $9 croissants. She had yelled at him to go, go, go. She had quite literally hijacked her own boss. He scanned the room briefly, then his gaze landed squarely on Grace. Unblinking, calm, almost amused. Then, with a faint, unreadable smile tugging at the corner of his lips, he said, "I hope my arrival this morning didn't cause anyone to mistake me for a driver." The room went silent. Then, like a wave, every head turned toward Grace. She sat frozen, her face flushed, her throat tightened. A pen dropped from her hand and clattered onto the table. She didn't even flinch. It was the kind of embarrassment that wrapped around you like a straitjacket. Immediate, inescapable. She wasn't sure if she'd breathed since he walked in. All she knew was that she had entered the wrong car and walked straight into the most awkward moment of her professional life. The rest of the day passed like she was holding her breath underwater. Grace sat at her desk pretending to work, but her fingers hovered above the keyboard, frozen, unmoving. She stared at a blank spreadsheet like it was a final exam in a language she'd never studied. From time to time, she'd glance sideways at the hallway, expecting someone from HR to come marching in with a clipboard and a box. Her heart jumped every time an email notification popped up, each ping sounding like a countdown to unemployment. By 2 p.m., she had mentally rehearsed 5 versions of her apology, 3 justifications for her mistake, and 1 potential escape plan involving pretending to faint and being wheeled out of the building. At exactly 3:15 p.m., her desk phone rang. She didn't even say, "Hello." "Mr. Miller would like to see you now," came the cool voice of the receptionist. Just that. No tone, no hint, no clue. Grace's throat tightened. She stood slowly. Her legs didn't feel like they were entirely part of her. She smoothed down her damp blouse, wiped her clammy hands on the sides of her skirt, and made her way toward the executive wing with the solemnity of someone reporting to the gallows. The hallway leading to Thomas Miller's office was almost unnaturally quiet, like a museum right before closing. The kind of silence that amplifies your heartbeat in your ears. His assistant nodded her in without a word. Inside, the office was immaculate. Polished floors, cold, modern furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows washed in gray light from the city skyline. The space was as perfectly arranged as the man who occupied it. Thomas was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out over the rainy city as if contemplating a corporate merger, or maybe the meaning of existence. He didn't turn around, just gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Have a seat, Miss Stone." His voice was calm. Even. Almost too calm. Grace sat, spine ramrod straight, hands in her lap, her mind racing with every possible outcome of this conversation. He took a moment before sitting opposite her. Then, without looking up, he said, "You have a sharp eye." Grace blinked. "Wait. What?" "A unique way of expressing yourself," he added, flipping through something on his tablet. "You're direct, observant, and clearly not afraid to give orders to strangers in luxury vehicles." There it was, that dry, razor-edged sarcasm again. And though he didn't smile, something behind his words betrayed a quiet, deliberate amusement. Grace didn't know whether to respond or stay frozen. She chose frozen. "Which is why," he continued, finally looking up and meeting her gaze, "I want you to oversee the full inspection of the 10th floor before Friday." "The 10th floor?" she repeated dumbly. "You mean, like a facilities walkthrough?" "Lights, printers, HVAC, the coffee machine. Every detail that might go wrong, check it. If something flickers or drips or smells off, I want it noted. Personally." There was a pause. Grace squinted slightly, trying to read him. "Me?" she said. "Why me?" Thomas tilted his head, deadpan. "Because you notice things. You speak your mind, and clearly you have no trouble issuing commands, even when you're completely wrong." Another pause. Then, without missing a beat, he added, "Unless, of course, you'd prefer to accidentally get into another stranger's car. Perhaps this time, a garbage truck?" Grace's jaw dropped. Her face flushed crimson. He'd just made a joke. A CEO-level joke, sure. Dry, pointed, slightly terrifying, but still a joke. She let out a nervous laugh, the tension breaking like a bubble. Okay, 10th floor it is. Got it. No flickering lights, no broken printers, no lukewarm coffee, and no garbage trucks. Check. Thomas didn't smile. But something in his expression shifted, an almost imperceptible nod of approval, like a chess player satisfied with his opponent's next move. He returned his attention to the tablet. You're dismissed. She stood slowly, still unsure whether she'd just been complimented, tested, or set up for some elaborate corporate hazing ritual. But one thing was clear. She wasn't being fired. Not today. As she stepped out into the hallway, her mind was still spinning. He could have scolded her. He could have humiliated her. He could have quietly erased her name from the system with the stroke of a key. Instead, he gave her a task, a strange task, a demanding one, and oddly specific. It wasn't mercy. It was trust, or maybe curiosity, or both. She didn't know what Thomas Miller wanted from her. But whatever game this was, Grace had just been invited to play. Grace arrived on the 10th floor with a clipboard tucked under her arm and determination in her stride, though her sneakers still squeaked from yesterday's rain. Her hair was tied up in a practical bun that had already begun to sag from humidity and frustration, and her white blouse bore the faint outline of a coffee splash she had long given up trying to hide. She scanned the floor. The investors would be touring this level in 2 days, and Thomas Miller had asked her, personally, to ensure it was flawless. No pressure, right? First problem, the light. One ceiling bulb near the meeting area was blinking erratically like it was auditioning for a horror film. She stood under it, hands on hips, watching it flicker with increasing irritation. Click, pause. Click, click. She sighed and made a note. Second issue, the carpet near the main hallway. It squished slightly under her shoes and smelled faintly of old soup and damp socks. She leaned down to touch it, recoiled, then wrote in all caps, "Replace immediately." Then came the coffee machine, an old, boxy model tucked in the corner of the break area. She pressed the espresso button and waited. A weak pfft sound sputtered from the nozzle, followed by a single drop. One drop. That was it. Grace held the cup up like it was Exhibit A in a court case. Really? One drop? What is this, homeopathic coffee? She muttered, setting the cup down as if it had personally offended her. She turned toward the final item on her checklist, the printer, the one every department avoided. She had heard whispers about it, employees who had tried to fix it and never returned the same. She approached slowly, as if it could sense fear. The screen flashed a cheerful lie. Ready to print. Oh, you liar, Grace murmured under her breath. She hit print test page and crossed her arms. The machine hummed, then rattled. Then, in what sounded like a demonic exhale, emitted a guttural mechanical grack that sent shivers down her spine. The screen blinked. Paper jam. Grace dropped to her knees, pulled open the tray, and began extracting crumpled pages like a surgeon in an emergency. She grunted, shoving her arm further inside the machine. "This printer is possessed," she whispered. Her hair slipped out of its bun, toner smeared across her cheek, and static clung to her blouse. She looked like someone halfway through a battle with a wild animal, and losing. Just then, Rachel's voice echoed down the hallway. "Grace, he's coming! Thomas is coming this way." "What?" "No!" Grace hissed, still crouched on the floor, half of her upper body inside the printer. Rachel's voice came closer. "You need to... Tell him I got abducted. Tell him I'm on a Zoom call. I don't know, make something up," Grace yelped. too late. Polished shoes stepped into view. Grace froze. Slowly, she turned her head. Thomas Miller stood at the doorway, perfectly composed in his charcoal gray suit, one eyebrow slightly raised. His expression was unreadable until it wasn't. For the first time since she met him, Grace saw it. A grin. The beginnings of an actual smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, and then, unmistakably, he laughed. Not a corporate chuckle, not a PR smile, an unguarded, genuine laugh. Grace, still kneeling next to the cursed printer, blinked. "I can explain," she said, her voice dry. Thomas stepped closer, hands casually in his pockets. "Looks like the printer finally met someone more stubborn than it is." She groaned and sat back against the cabinet. "I'm billing it for emotional damage." He glanced at the disaster zone, the paper jammed in odd angles, the inky smudges on her face, the chaos around her, and then back at her. "You're thorough," he said, with an amused tilt of his head. "Is that a compliment?" He didn't answer, just gave her a slow nod and turned to leave, the trace of a smile still on his lips. As he disappeared down the hallway, Grace sat on the cold floor, hair frizzy, hands covered in toner, and heart pounding louder than the dying hum of the printer. She exhaled and smiled, because for the first time since walking into this building, she felt seen. Grace Stone never imagined she'd become the face of anything, especially not in a corporate building where she still struggled to remember which hallway led to the break room. But fate, once again, had other plans. And this time, it showed up with a microphone and a camera. That morning, the company auditorium buzzed with energy. Diamond Enterprises was hosting its quarterly strategy launch, complete with investors, journalists, and an overwhelming number of perfectly tailored suits. Grace, in her usual understated fashion, tried her best to blend in by standing near the juice bar, sipping quietly and avoiding all eye contact. And then he appeared. A young reporter, sharp suit, mic in hand, scanning the crowd like he was looking for the one person who didn't want to be found. His eyes landed on Grace. "Excuse me, do you work here?" he asked, friendly but clearly in a rush. Grace blinked. Yes. I work in the projects department." "Perfect. I just need a quick comment for our segment. Just a few words. You're okay with that, right?" "I don't really think I'm the—" "Great," he cut in, already lifting the mic. The camera light blinked red. No more time to decline. "What are your thoughts on the company's new CEO?" She froze. Her brain hit a blank wall. Then, like a short film playing at double speed, she remembered it all. The rainy morning, the black Mercedes, the icy stare in the rearview mirror, the possessed printer, the coffee weaker than rainwater, and Thomas Miller's smirk when she nearly broke the office copier in half. Grace exhaled and smiled, a little nervously, but honestly. "He's cold, very mysterious, definitely obsessed with coffee." She laughed, almost to herself. "To be honest, I thought he was going to fire me, but instead he asked me to inspect an entire floor, including a printer that howls like a zombie." The reporter laughed. "That's fantastic. Thank you, Grace." She gave a small wave and turned to walk off, still unsure what had just happened. The next morning. The internal newsletter went live. Headline: "The Mysterious Boss, Through the Eyes of a New Hire." Below it, a screenshot of Grace, mid-sentence, eyebrows raised, orange juice in hand. The video? #1 on the company intranet. Within 3 hours. Colleagues smiled at her in the hallway. Some gave her nods like she was a minor celebrity. One intern actually clapped. And Rachel, her always dramatic desk neighbor, walked up with a tablet like she'd just unearthed a scandal. "You need to See, this. Grace glanced at the screen. There she was. Her confused expression, her awkward grin, her now infamous line about the zombie printer. She groaned. Nope, delete it. I don't exist. Rachel was laughing so hard she nearly dropped the tablet. You're in the internal video, with music and subtitles. And then the phone rang. Rachel stopped laughing immediately. It's him, she whispered. Thomas? Grace felt her soul leave her body. Inside the CEO's office, she stood awkwardly by the door. You called for me? She asked. Thomas Miller was by the window, his silhouette framed by the morning light. He turned slowly, expression unreadable. I saw the video, he said. Grace swallowed. And? I think you should join the internal communications campaign, as the face of it. I'm sorry, what? You have a gift. You're natural, funny, honest. People responded to that. And frankly, this company could use more of that. I want our team to see something real behind the suits. He paused, glancing down at his jacket. Even the part that's obsessed with coffee, and apparently haunted office printers. Grace wasn't sure whether to laugh or run. But one thing was clear. This wasn't a joke. She had somehow become the voice and the face of Diamond Enterprises, without even trying. The message came with no explanation, just a subject line. Evening plans. Grace read the email twice, short, precise, from Thomas Miller, naturally. He wanted her to accompany him to a formal investor dinner. No details, no context, just an address, a time, and a note that read, Dress sharp, be yourself, expect the unexpected. Grace sat at her desk, blinking at the screen, heart already pounding. Rachel peeked over the divider like a sitcom sidekick sensing drama. You're not just attending dinner, Rachel whispered. You're going as his shield. What do you mean? There's always one investor who tries to flirt. And word is, this year's threat wears red lipstick and requests slow dances. Grace blinked. So? I'm the bodyguard? No, Rachel grinned. You're the decoy. When Grace stepped into the venue that evening, it was like walking into a high society spy film. Warm lighting, crystal glasses, polished silver, and Thomas, waiting near the center table in a charcoal suit that fit like it had been designed with intimidation in mind. He glanced at her, and something in his eyes softened. You're right on time, he said. She adjusted her clutch. You're still mysterious. I guess some things don't change. He didn't smile, but his eyes sparkled slightly. There's something you should know, he said, leaning closer, his voice low. If I tap my water glass once, make up an emergency. Fire alarm, phone call, plumbing disaster, anything to pull me away. Or, she whispered back, I could just spill wine on your lap and call it a night. He blinked. Remind me again why I picked you? Because I'm unpredictable, and I don't flirt with CEOs on weekdays. Thomas gave a small laugh, genuine, short, but real. The evening unfolded like a perfectly orchestrated scene. Miss Delaney, an elegant woman in crimson, perfume trailing behind her, approached halfway through the appetizer course. She laid her hand on Thomas's arm with the elegance of someone used to owning every room she entered. I've missed our chats, she purred. Thomas didn't move, but he tapped the side of his glass. Once. Grace, without missing a beat, leaned in. Mr. Miller, the assistant from legal just called. There's been a situation. Something about a misplaced contract and a furious attorney. He nodded, like this was the fifth one tonight. Excuse me, he said to Delaney. Duty calls. By dessert, they'd repeated the routine 3 more times. A fake phone call, an allergy scare, even a pretend request from the valet. Their chemistry? Impeccable. No script, just rhythm. Like 2 spies who didn't need earpieces. When the crowd thinned and the music softened into background jazz, Thomas walked her out to the valet line. The city lights flickered above them, casting soft shadows. "You were perfect," he said, his tone quieter now. "I improvise well under pressure." He looked at her, steady, intent. "You do realize," he said slowly, "how dangerous you are?" Grace's heart stuttered, but her voice remained even. "Only when I get into the wrong car." Thomas smiled. Not the polite, corporate smile. The real one. Quiet. Warm. Like something rare finally letting itself be seen. They didn't say anything more as the car pulled up. But the air between them? It carried more than just the night's laughter. It carried something unspoken. Something that was no longer just a game. The Monday after the investor dinner arrived like any other day. Gray skies, black coffee, elevator dings. But Grace knew something had shifted. Thomas Miller wasn't just distant. He was absent, not physically. No, he still attended meetings, still walked the corridors in his immaculate suits. But something in him had closed, sharply, silently. There were no more glances across the room, no shared smirks, no encrypted emails with sarcastic subject lines. It was as if their connection had been packed away in a neat little box and buried where no one could dig it up again. Grace waited 3 days. 3 long days of pretending that reports mattered more than heartbeats. That she hadn't stood under city lights with him, matching breath for breath. That he hadn't looked at her like she was something unexpected and quietly extraordinary. By Thursday, she couldn't bear it anymore. She knocked on his door, not like the playful taps from before. 2 firm knocks, 1 held breath. "Come in." His voice was clipped, polite, sterile. She stepped inside. He didn't look up. "I finished the quarterly analysis," she said, laying the file on his desk. Her tone was controlled, but her heart was loud. "And I need to ask something." Thomas glanced at her briefly, then returned to his screen. "Are you really going to pretend none of it happened?" Her voice softened. "The dinner, the signals, the way you looked at me that night." He was quiet for a long time. Then, without a word, he reached into the drawer and slid a small white envelope across the desk. Her name was written in his handwriting, clean, sharp, precise. She hesitated, then took it. Her fingers trembled. Thomas didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The silence had already spoken louder than any explanation. She walked out without opening the letter. Not yet. Not in front of him. She waited until she was alone, sitting on the edge of her bed, the city flickering in the distance, headlights moving like time refusing to stop. She unfolded the note slowly, carefully. It read, "You made me laugh on a day I thought I'd forgotten how. You walked into my life like chaos wrapped in clarity, and that's what scares me most, because everything I touch, I ruin, and I couldn't bear to ruin you." Her chest tightened, her hands stilled. Grace folded the letter again, pressing her palm over it as if that would quiet the sting. She didn't cry. Not then. But her eyes burned, and her heart whispered what her lips couldn't say out loud. You weren't the only one afraid. The ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, buzzing with laughter, champagne flutes clinking, and soft jazz weaving through velvet air. It was the company's year-end gala, an annual ritual of polished speeches, polite applause, and the occasional surprise. Tonight, Grace hadn't expected to be one of them. She stood at the back, wearing a dress she almost didn't buy, watching others take the stage. She clapped when it was polite, smiled when it was expected, but her mind was elsewhere. On a white envelope, a man with storm-gray eyes, and a silence that still echoed louder than music. Then she heard her name. Grace Stone, the host beamed, for initiative, resilience, and proving that being in the wrong car can sometimes lead to the right direction. A beat of stunned silence. Grace blinked. Someone nudged her gently. "That's you." She walked to the stage, heels clicking louder than her heartbeat. The spotlight was warm on her skin. The room faded. She took the mic, cleared her throat, then smiled. Wry, a little crooked. "Very, Grace. I only wanted to get to work on time," she said, voice steady. "Didn't expect to hop into a stranger's car and accidentally insult my future boss, but life has a sense of humor." Laughter. She paused, then glanced at the audience. Not searching, just hoping. "I thought I was late for something important. Turns out I was right on time for something I never saw coming." Applause erupted. Grace bowed slightly and stepped down. She slipped past the crowd, her eyes scanning for the exit. And then she heard it. "Grace." She froze. That voice, the one her mind had memorized and tried to forget. She turned. Thomas stood just outside the glow of the chandelier lights. No podium, no pretense. Just him. Tie slightly loosened, hands in his pockets, but gaze unwavering. "I lost you twice," he said, quietly enough that only she could hear. "Once at that rainy intersection. The second time because I let fear win." Grace didn't speak. Her heart did. He stepped closer. "I don't want to lose you a third time." A pause. Then, softer. "I just want to be the guy you can jump into a car with, even if you're not sure it's your Uber." She stared at him. At the man who had once looked untouchable, unreadable, unreachable, and now stood before her, vulnerable. "I still check the license plates," she murmured. His mouth twitched. "I wouldn't expect less." A silence stretched, not awkward, just full, of questions, of answers, of everything between the lines. Then Grace nodded. "Let's take the long way home." And just like that, under the golden lights of a room filled with strangers, they walked out. Two people who got lost, found their way, and chose, finally, to ride the same direction. Together. The city glowed beneath them like 1,000 scattered stars. On the rooftop of an old stone building, secluded, quiet, kissed by a soft breeze, stood a small round table set for two. Warm string lights framed the night like fireflies, frozen in motion. A single candle flickered between them, casting golden light across her face. Grace looked up, a little stunned. "You did all this?" Thomas smiled, almost shy. "Technically, my assistant helped with the logistics, but the chaos, that was all me." She laughed, and the sound carried into the wind. They ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing, about how the croissant she once complained about had become an office joke, about how she still refused to use the company's printer, about how socks and umbrellas somehow defined their beginning. And then, when dessert arrived, a tiny plate with a perfectly round chocolate truffle, Thomas stood. "I've been trying to say this since the day you hijacked my car," he said, reaching into his pocket. Grace blinked. Thomas stepped around the table and knelt down on one knee, the city behind him, the candlelight painting him in gold. "From the moment you stepped into my car," he said softly, holding up a small velvet box, "I started driving in the right direction." He opened it. A simple, elegant ring shimmered inside. "Grace Stone," he continued, voice unshaken, eyes never leaving hers, "will you marry me? And even if you mistake another car for Uber someday, just make sure you're sitting beside me." Grace gasped, one hand over her mouth, the other already reaching toward him. She let out a half laugh, half sob. "I will. But next time, we're taking my car, and I'm driving." Thomas chuckled, rising to his feet. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her close. Far below, the city never stopped moving. But on that rooftop, time paused, just for them. In a story that began with a mistake, they found everything they were never looking for. The wedding was small, sunlit, and full of laughter, just as they'd planned. No grand ballroom, no towering cake, just a cozy garden tucked behind a bookshop, fairy lights strung between trees, chairs mismatched on purpose, and a very deliberate lack of seriousness. The invitation had set the tone. If you laugh, you belong here. If you trip, it's fate. If you've ever gotten into the wrong car, then you understand love. Thomas stood at the altar in a soft blue suit, his tie slightly off-center like he hadn't quite decided whether to be formal or just himself. Tucked into his breast pocket was a tiny patch of fabric shaped like a penguin sock, a quiet, ridiculous tribute to the girl who turned his world sideways. Grace walked down the aisle, holding a bouquet made of old book pages and tiny sunflowers, her smile a little nervous, a little mischievous, completely her. As she reached him, the music faded, but the guests were already sniffling and giggling. They didn't read vows. They told stories. Thomas went first, clearing his throat. She once mistook me for a cab driver. She yelled at me. She almost reviewed me on Uber. Laughter. And I fell in love somewhere between her yelling and her realizing I wasn't. Then Grace turned to him. I choose to sit next to the man who can still make me laugh, even when I'm soaked, late, and absolutely sure the universe is conspiring against me. They didn't kiss on cue. They bumped noses, laughed, kissed again. And when confetti flew and applause broke out, it wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. No glass slippers, no magic pumpkin, just one very wrong car ride that somehow led them to exactly the right place. And as they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, hearts wide open, someone in the back whispered, "Now that's the kind of mistake I want to make." If you were sitting in the back seat of this love story, how would you rate it on a scale from 1 to 10? Drop your score in the comments, and tell us why. Is it a 10-10 for being heartwarming? An 8-10 because you're hoping for a part 2? Or a full-on 11-10 because you've gotten into the wrong car before, just like Grace? And hey, if you want more unexpected, feel-good love stories like this, comment, "I want to get in the wrong car again." Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that make your heart smile, and maybe even tear up a little.